My daughter's name is Amber Rae. I remember she fought really hard for that hour and a half we got to spend with her.
Welcome to Still a Part of Us, a place where moms and dads share the story of their child who was stillborn or who died in infancy. I'm Winter.
And I'm Lee. We are grateful you joined us today. Please note that this is a story of loss and has triggers.
Thanks to our lost parents who are willing to be vulnerable and share their children with us.
If you're listening to this podcast, just know that on our YouTube channel there are pictures and videos that are related to the stories that are being shared.
Subscribe and share it with a friend that might need it and tell them to subscribe. Why? Because people need to know that even though our babies are no longer with us, they're still a part of us.
Some of you may remember Jeff. We talked about his son who passed away, Jeff Jr. We are saddened, but we're happy that he is coming on to talk about his daughter, Amber. Now, Jeff, you and your wife, Bree, we personally know you. You're our family as well, but growing up with Bree, she's a little bit younger than mine. She's my cousin, so she was always a little bit younger, and then we were able to meet you as you guys moved into an adjoining neighborhood, and we were able to get to know you guys a little bit, and then we got to know you a lot better when you guys were going through the strife with your son. After Jeff's passing, how was life? Was it completely darkness? Was it always, or were you able to come to grips a little bit with life? This is sort of an unfair question.
It definitely makes sense. After little Jeff, it's kind of been one big foggy time. It's because it's been really hard. We believed, for the most part, that it was, a fluke when we opted not to do genetic testing, because of how often it is a fluke in our types, in our kind of scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just kind of a time where we were kind of like, when possibly do we think we resume, trying to grow our family?
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't, I feel like it took a while, but it definitely, as far as like to make that kind of decision or commitment to, from especially having that kind of experience, even though, believing at the time that it was a fluke.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely preface us opting not to do genetic testing, because that definitely comes into play with our story about Amber. For the most part, life with work went back to normal. My employer was very nice to give me a lot of time off, and worked with me on days that were difficult. And Bree, of course, being she works for herself, she was able to, pick days that were really hard and, try not to push herself over the edge and, past the limit. So there were definitely days that weren't as hard as other days, but definitely every second, every minute, there was a thought about little Jeff,
Mm-hmm.
about, that experience. It's not something you can just not think about.
Something that you could just turn off. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Especially because, I created a habit of going to the cemetery to visit little Jeff in his spot. And I made that habit before going to work, and it actually became difficult to do that every day, partially because of the pandemic and not having to drive into work. And so it wasn't a stop I was making in the morning unless I was going to the cemetery and back, which is a block away, which isn't very far. So I honestly have not a very good excuse other than the fact of life itself was drastically different,
Yeah.
especially for, not just talking about me, but for majority of
everybody,
people. Yeah, everybody. So I still attempted to do, my morning ritual, might I say,
Yeah.
of going to visit, and most of the time it being a walk instead of a drive, but it definitely wasn't as easy to go and visit every day like I was doing before the pandemic.
Now, I asked this just for reference when we're going to talk about when you and Bree decided to, as you said, expand your family after little Jeff's, because as you said, you guys were in a fog. It just felt, I'm sure it felt like a surreal dream. Like, what are we doing? How can we do this? And then you guys deciding to try to have another child, and just that reference to what you guys were feeling and to how you guys were doing. I only asked that to show that, yes, we are, as a family, as individuals, we are going forward, not forgetting him, but trying to add to him.
Yeah,
Or
definitely wasn't.
Not add to him, but
Yeah, it definitely wasn't. It's definitely not to completely shut down and not do anything is definitely not our style. We definitely try to keep ourselves busy, and not necessarily to suppress, emotions, but definitely to, I know myself as from when I was a kid, I just wanted to play, I just wanted to go and do stuff and have, make memories, hang out with people. And so for us to like just not be around people or not go do something or take Murphy to go do something, that's not our style. Cause if all of my kids were still alive, I know they would all want to go and do something fun.
Yeah.
Obviously they're not all with me, but I would like to think that I would try and make that decision to do something fun and to give them that childhood that I had where I was able to go play. And so,
well, let's talk about your decision with you and Bree to try to conceive and expand your family. Was it this is going to sound like an idiot question, but was it hard to make that decision?
Yeah, we had a lot of anxiety over it. A lot of stress just because of having that experience, having to go through the loss of a child to then make a decision to try for another child that's really hard. But when we originally talked about it after little Jeff, that wasn't the time we decided, but I don't remember our conversation very well, but I know that we both were on the same page that we would try and get ourselves to a point where we were mentally right, and to be as emotionally right as we could, before we, continued trying to expand our family. And when we did finally decide, there was still all that anxiety and emotion, but we felt like we were in a place where we could attempt. And again, we thought it was a fluke with little Jeff and tried, and I'm probably jumping ahead, but ultimately getting the same diagnosis as little Jeff.
Now, the disease is called bilateral renal agenesis.
Correct.
And that is where the body does not produce the kidneys in the formation. Could you expand a little bit more for those who are listening?
Yeah.
What kidneys function in a developing fetus and a developing child?
How it was explained to us, and I'm sure this is very, very dumbed down for me to understand, is that our kidneys produce the pee, And so babies, if they have kidneys, they produce pee, which then when they urinate when they're in development, it creates the amniotic fluid, which then in turn, the amniotic fluid is what helps the development of lungs as well. So in the case of little Jeff and in Amber's, or any other cases with bilateral renal agenesis, typically if the baby is not born a stillbirth, they're born, but they die from lack of oxygen because of
underdeveloped lungs. Okay.
So it's interesting how all those things have to go perfect.
Yeah.
To be able to, and that's based on my medical knowledge, which is none, and it dumbed down. So I'm sure there's a lot more to it, but
yeah. So you guys, with Amber, you guys conceived, and then did you guys right away get genetic testing just to make sure? Or were you guys like, hey, we'll wait a couple weeks, wait until, was it 18 weeks where they do the anatomy scan? Or
so at 16 weeks, I believe that's when, or at 20 weeks is when we did the anatomy scan with little Jeff, and we wanted to do an anatomy scan for Amber earlier than the 20 weeks, just because we wanted to do one at the 20 weeks as well.
Yeah.
Just so that we could rule that out as soon as possible so we could breathe, basically.
Yeah.
And obviously not going to disclose who my doctor was, but we did go to a hospital. We got to go in the back door and go up the employee way, just because it was our doctor wanted us to be able to not have to pay for an ultrasound, not have to pay for anything to go in for this, to get our peace of mind.
Yeah.
And when we went in and doing the ultrasound, he was a little hesitant to make any sort of decision because he's not an ultrasound tech.
Mm-hmm.
He's a doctor, right?
Yeah.
But he just said, I'd like you to come in next week to the other hospital that he worked at to be able to do it there, just because he felt like he wasn't getting like a clear picture that he wanted, which I believe that's when Bree felt like something was wrong again, and he probably wanted us to be on the record when something like that's being told, like a diagnosis or findings from an ultrasound. So I totally respect that. But I continue to stay very optimistic and just say he just couldn't see it. It is early. Let's go in next week and we'll go from there and try and like get that peace of mind. But definitely was very unsettling, especially for Bree.
Yeah.
And that does obviously affect me and my optimism. I was definitely trying to stay optimistic, but again, from having an experience, it's very hard sometimes to stay optimistic when you're not given the answer that you're going specifically to get, to then feel a little less anxious. So that's when we went in the next week. I believe it was 17 weeks. And that's where they said, we're not seeing amniotic fluid. And so it was kind of like one of those moments where they start talking and you're only hearing what you heard the previous time, and kind of that shock factor of like, is this actually happening again? And kind of definitely a lot more anger probably this time than last time, because last time it was more of a shock and sadness, and this time it was more sadness and anger when what you thought wasn't supposed to happen again or happened in the first place happened again.
Yeah, the 1 in a million possibility happened to you twice in a row.
Yeah, and that's kind of when you think, I mean, obviously hindsight's 20/20, but that's when you think, well, we might have approached things a little bit more different if we would have done genetic testing with little Jeff. If we would have, but we had no reason to believe ourselves that it was genetic, just because no one in our family has ever had any problems with that that we know of. It just was a very, I don't know, the anger of not doing it in the first place, kind of mad at yourself because you're like, that this obviously is something that is, it's not working. Something's not working, some sort of DNA, right? So, and that's kind of when I don't know, the fog just got foggier and the swirls came in, and you kind of were like, I don't know, it's hard to explain. And again, coming up on her anniversary and birthday, right?
Yeah.
I should lead with birthday and anniversary of her passing. But while we're coming up on that, I mean, it definitely is. It's definitely a little bit harder to remember exact sequence of events or exact feelings in the times.
Yeah. The fog that you mentioned, it's a defensive mechanism, and I've experienced it even with Brandon's own passing, where I get mad at myself because I just can't remember. It's not that I've forgotten it, I just can't remember it. And that fog it's a good thing and a bad thing. So after you get the anatomy scan and they have to tell you that there is an amniotic fluid, what do you guys do? Because this is about 17 weeks and you still have to make a decision. I don't know if the decision to, I think I with Jeff, they said, oh, you can either continue to carry little Jeff or terminate the pregnancy. And I don't know if they gave you that option again with Amber.
It definitely was presented differently for Amber, just because we had our doctor, and the one that we had was whatever doctor was on call that we came up to that particular hospital, and he definitely knows
your history,
our
your
history,
story.
and our situation with little Jeff, and so he definitely said, obviously this is what we have to tell you as far as your options. And I'm pretty sure he knew which one we would decide based on little Jeff's story and the decision we made with him. And so, but those options were presented, but definitely it was in a way of, I'm sorry, and these are, and unfortunately you already know these are your options, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And so and we definitely Bree and I talked about it, in length, about how incredibly unfair this all is, to have to make that decision, incredibly unfair to Bree to have to carry a child again that we don't get to take home. But we definitely sat down and tried to make a decision of like, is this something that we do like we did with little Jeff, where we carry full term? And it's something that we did ponder a lot on, and came to the conclusion that we would carry to full term. And the reason why we did that in the first place for little Jeff is so that we could spend as much time as we could with him and be able to see more of what he looked like, or he looked like, instead of an underdeveloped baby, right? And so that's what we decided to do for Amber as well, which obviously, to anybody making that first decision for one child, it's definitely not an easy one. And whatever anybody decided, no one would judge you for.
Yeah.
That was definitely the decision that we felt like would help our grief. And at that point, it definitely just because it was what we'd already gone through, which is unfortunately feels like, not your first rodeo. You say that's what you're going to do because you kind of set, unfortunately, a precedent of what we were going to do.
After that, how was the rest of the, you had to plan for the future, the short future that it would be with this daughter. When did you find out did you find out at that anatomy scan or?
We actually didn't. They couldn't tell us for sure. And Bree would be able to say better when. I don't remember which scan they did that they said we're pretty sure, but because of no amniotic fluid, it was
sort of hard to see.
Very hard to see definition in the body. So to be able to tell you what gender the baby was very difficult. So she would be able to know that, but I do remember it was not that day. They just said your baby, right? And
so you knew your baby at that time had a wonderful opportunity, but a short opportunity. How did you and Bree prepare yourselves to continue on with the pregnancy and then continue on with the knowledge of this is an extremely short time with this child and this daughter? What did you guys do?
Well, it was pretty crazy, just like everybody knows with everything that happened with like the pandemic. I think for the most part we kind of said like we owe it to ourselves and we owe it to Amber to definitely live our lives like we would normally instead of be sad, or not that we can't be sad, but we wanted to like do our best to try and make normalcy out of a very abnormal situation, but not at the same time not covering it up, because that definitely isn't the answer either.
Yeah.
So basically a bunch of oxymorons there. But we definitely tried to like do the things that we would do as a family that we would normally do, and all at the same time, including in our discussions and in our like a weekly activity to the cemetery, trying to include our son. And I think I mentioned this, but we do have one living child, our oldest, and so she's unfortunately had to deal with this with us. And we've fortunately had her to put smiles on our face. And a lot of the stuff that we probably wish we could have done in 2020, we might not have been able to do because of how much wasn't happening.
Yeah.
Or how much was happening, if that makes sense. And I mean, we still tried to play our sports as normal. We tried to do, I was playing indoor soccer and tore my ACL in August, and 2 months before her birth, had to get surgery a month before her birth, and then just a crazy year to try and I'm sure a lot of people have felt extremely lonely with like infant loss in 2020, like, or even I guess now, but like in 2020 itself, just how everybody was isolated and tried to stay away from each other, and businesses being shut down. It was a lot more lonely time than with little Jeff.
Yeah.
And that's not fault to anybody, of course. It's just the way that stuff was happening, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I don't as far as preparing for meeting Amber, a lot of other emotions came up from little Jeff's experience. Shortly after little Jeff's funeral, I I felt extremely guilty because I always said I'd do anything for my son, and I didn't. I had this thought that, I didn't, and this was a personal thing. Obviously, it's not saying it for anybody else, but I was like, at one point before meeting little Jeff, I had this thought of, at that time I said I wanted to like dig his grave and then backfill his grave, because those would have been like the last things that I could have done for him. I didn't know that you can't dig the hole. So I did learn that later. But I did find out that I could backfill, and I kind of had that regret a little bit, just because that's something that I had thought of, but I didn't do, if that makes sense. And when we were preparing and we had gone to the cemetery and looked at, where Amber could possibly be buried, it didn't seem right that they would be on separate rows and apart, in the section they call Babyland, which is, where lots of infants have been buried. So we decided, well, we're either going to move him to the same row as Amber so that they can be together, or we're going to have to figure something else out. And if we were going to have to move him anyways, we decided that we would buy our own plots and put them basically where their final resting spot would be, and which would be our final resting spot. Then we wouldn't have to move little Jeff to be by Amber and then move them later when one of us passes. It would be instead they will just be there for us.
Yeah.
So that was a lot of decisions we were making, which is unfortunately decisions we were making.
Decisions that older people should be making.
Yeah.
Not you.
Not me. So, I mean, I guess because I brought up the backfilling and the digging and the moving of graves, I think one of my biggest takeaways from Amber's experience is the moving of little Jeff and then her burial the next day.
Yeah.
So, like we went to I think they call it disinterment of little Jeff. And that was the night. It was kind of like the late afternoon before Amber's funeral. So it was in between her birth and her funeral, because we made that decision that we would move him, right? And so we went and they kind of excavated right there and grabbed his box, and we moved it over to our new spot where they'd already dug for him, and I was able to, place him in his new spot and backfill, and I did that, me and Bree alone, and that was almost like an overwhelming closure to like kind of so it was a very, very crappy experience that I've had, losing two children. But there was something that I was able to get out of it, that I still can do things for my children, and even if that's involving them in my daily thoughts and communications, because they're still mine, that I can still do that. So I was able to backfill him, and place the grass back and reflect and meditate with Bree for our, the next day, for when we would be back in the same spot to do the same thing for Amber. But it definitely was some symbolism for us, because little Jeff was waiting for her. And when we then had the funeral the next day, after all the events and words that were said and this small gathering that we had, I was able to place her in her resting spot, and then as her dad backfill and do that for my child. that was something that was really important to me, and I felt like I was able to do it the right way for my closure. It felt like impossible to get out of the limo with the box with Amber and to walk her to the beautiful flowers in front of all of my siblings and my parents, my in-laws. The words that I don't remember anything that I said, but I spoke at her funeral as well. But one thing I remember is my family of 5 doesn't look like a normal family of 5, but it's normal to me. And that's something that I'll never forget, just because it really makes sense, like it's normal to me, and it's normal to me to talk about my children. I know they're deceased, and some people might think that that's weird, especially when they haven't gone through that kind of an experience. But like, that's therapeutic to me, and that's normal for me because I get to share what my normal family looks like. It might not be normal to you.
We sort of didn't talk about her birth. I don't know if you would like to talk about her birth.
Yeah, it definitely was very hard. We only got an hour and a half with her. I think it was about an hour and 20 minutes. She didn't make any sounds, but she did have a very slow heartbeat when she came out.
Mm-hmm.
And in our scenario, they did ask us if they wanted to have any intervening medicine or things to help. And because of the fatal diagnosis, we declined. One thing about the hospital, being so deep into the pandemic, it was not like it was for our previous 2 births, where family could come to the hospital. It was, like I talked about, it was very, very lonely. We were able to get permission for our daughter to be able to come to the hospital with my in-laws and meet her sister. Everything happened so fast in the hospital, because Breeze had this was her 3rd child, and being small, things progressed extremely quickly.
Yeah.
Our doctor wasn't able to make it, to deliver. It was the on-call doctor, which did a phenomenal job as well. But it was an interesting experience, just because of only being able to have 2 people come in, and everybody being masked up, being able to read emotions and stuff like that was semi-difficult. And just the fact of it being just crazy 2020, that it just didn't make anything easier. It's not even the word. That was a dumb word.
No.
It didn't make anything smooth, I guess I should say. I don't know.
I think I understand. I think, sort of just disconnected. It wasn't easy. So, yeah, 2020 just sucked on top of such a terrible situation.
Yeah.
Tell me about your daughter's name, Amber Rae.
Amber is, the name comes from Bree's middle name. So she wanted to have, a piece of her name with Amber. And then Ray actually is it's Murphy's middle name as well. So we wanted to be able to share them, to have something that they could share, and it'd be something that they could, that Murphy especially would be able to cherish, just because we weren't able to bring home her sister. And it wasn't, the thought process behind a name, kind of like for little Jeff being the junior, that was special to me. That definitely helped me and then being a little girl and being able to take part of Bree's name and also share something with Murphy, I felt like we decided, both of us, that it would be very great for them to have for her to have those names.
That's wonderful. And the dearness of having a little bit of you guys with her name. I didn't know that. I didn't know that was how her name was formed.
Yeah, and there actually, besides it being Bree's middle name, I think it was just my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law liked that name. I don't think there was any significance behind it. I could be wrong, but that's what I believe. So, but now there's a huge significance to it, whether there was one or not. There were some things that did pop in my head as we were talking, that we did to kind of prepare. One being, we wrote letters to Amber before meeting her, before her birth, and I actually read that today, and I'd be lying if I told you I didn't, get emotional before coming over here to talk about it. But I was the way I wrote, you could tell I was excited to meet her, but also that I was pretty sad because I listed off some things that, I wouldn't be able to do with her, like teach her to drive or teach her how to shoot a gun or chase off boys that were trying to court her. So that was actually pretty hard to read that today. But I'm glad I did that. And I'm glad I saved it. But I did put a copy of that, and so did and Bree also wrote a letter, but we told each other that someday we'll read our letters that we wrote. Like I would read what Bree would write, but maybe that would be someday down the line, because I'm sure if she reads mine, she'll be a mess, and if I'm sure I read hers, I'll be even worse than I sound right now. And also, we wrote a letter to her after meeting her and before her funeral. Mine happened to be the night that we moved little Jeff and I backfilled, and mentioned that little Jeff would be there waiting for her, and that I mentioned several times how much I would miss her, and that I was glad that she fought really hard to be able to meet us. And I remember, talking about her dark hair and her looking just like Murphy, as a baby. And I also made her a amber yellowish bracelet, and I made Bree and Murphy and myself ones, and that was something that I know was important for Bree, since I had done that for little Jeff as well, that we all had kind of matching bracelets. And unfortunately they don't last the longest. Hemp is good, but it doesn't last very long when you have it on the whole, 24/7. But we've tried to keep those if we've been able to snag them when they've fallen off, and put them in some keepsakes. And Bree actually got another dress donated by that same person she bought it from. So they're matching dresses, Murphy and Bree, and got the other dress so we could make a tie out of it for me, and then a headband, a bow for Amber. And so we could all be matching for the funeral, and have those keepsakes. There's so many things that we did that I feel like we covered a lot of bases. And from taking pictures as a family, like family pictures, so that we can go back and remember that, like that's when you were pregnant with Amber, and there's little Jeff's giraffe that we take for for family pictures and stuff like that. And yeah, I think that helps. That kind of stuff helps Murphy see her family, and also remember her family, and also include her siblings with some things that we do.
Now, Jeff, I have a question. How has your healing after Amber's passing? You mentioned that you had a lot of anger. Do you still have anger? Of course, you know, emotions are emotions.
Yeah.
And everybody feels the litany of emotions, but how have you been?
I feel like I'm not. I feel like my frustration that I felt, or my anger that I felt, was definitely pretty. I shouldn't say frustration and anger. I should say mostly just the anger was pretty short.
Mm-hmm.
Very frustrated and disappointed, and but at this point, I obviously don't feel. I'm not angry. Was our situation unfortunate and it's sad? Yes. But like I still have to be a dad to my daughter. And also I still need to live my life because I am still alive. And I think that's the thing that a wise person once told me, the thing that we get so frustrated, or we get sad, or we get so distraught that we forget to do the thing that gives us life, and that's breathe. Right? I try and live my life where I take that deep breath. I'm not good at it. I take that deep breath though, and I try to step back and calm down in a situation that, you know, I'm getting emotional or tensed up in, because I know I need to take that breath because my children were not able to, you know, and that's something that I kind of want to live by every day. And I think at this point, I just try and take one day at a time, because tomorrow could be harder than today, or it could be a better day. And I can't let my emotions like dictate what day I am going to have. I should, although life is difficult, life is still good. I still have my wife, and I still have my oldest daughter, who both of them give me hope every single day. And my two children that I don't have with me give me hope and give me a goal. And depending on what you believe in, my goal is to see them again someday. And that's what gets me to the next day, because I have to do it.
I don't know if we've skipped over anything important that you would like to bring up.
So I would say to anybody that's going through something like this, like, be there for each other, check in with each other, like not just like once a day, or just like as you're jumping into bed to go to sleep, like you're checking on each other through the day, like asking each other how they're doing or what you can do for that person. And I definitely need to do a better job myself, but that's something that, like, you can't. A lot of these experiences are personal because they're my perspective and they're from my view, and Bree's might be slightly different in her view. But like we both need each other. And so I would just, that would be my only advice. And I love my children and I love my wife, and I just know that I wouldn't be where I am today without them and these experiences. And I hope that it can help somebody, because telling it helps me. So I guess it helped me.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much.